What's up, everyone? My name's Adam McDormand, and this is Medium Quality. Alright, we did it. We survived somehow to the end of 2017, and so it's time to talk about the best albums that came out this year. Now, as usual, I'm not going to do a strict numbered, ordered list because these albums are just my favorites. They're just the ones that I enjoyed listening to the most, and there's not really a clean and easy comparison to be made between many of these albums, most of which are in a pretty diverse set of genres. One item of housekeeping really quick before we dive into this list. There are absolutely going to be some albums on here that are not your favorites from this year, and likewise, there are going to be some albums that have gotten left off of this list that are albums that you really, really enjoyed. I would love to hear what your favorite albums are, so feel free to disagree with me kindly, if you can, in the comments section below. And I'm posting a companion piece on my blog over at mediumquality.net where I discuss about 25 other albums that didn't make this list and why they didn't make this list. One of those that didn't make the list is Kendrick Lamar's new album, so if you're a Kendrick fan, you might want to hop over to my blog and read about why it is that didn't make this list. And with that, let's jump right in. First up, Jay Som's Everybody Works. This is a relatively late addition to my list, as I just started hearing this album maybe a month or so ago, but it very quickly captured my attention. Right away, track one with these really kind of ambient, atmospheric instrumental swells and these really delicate, pristine-sounding vocals underneath, which gives way in track two to this sort of what sounds to me like a really nostalgic, almost emo revival sound. But I don't want to be reductive here because this album is way more than just an emo throwback. In fact, it probably has a lot more in common with some of the shoegaze bands that I don't really know a whole lot about than it does, your Into It Over It, your American Football, your Braid, because of the fact that it's produced in such a jangly, almost dreamy sort of a way. There's just chorus effect drenching everything in this album, and it gives it this really kind of ethereal sound. And I really, really enjoyed this album. Next up, Walk the Moon's What If Nothing. This is another late addition to my favorites list for the year. Much like their last album, I almost didn't even take the time to listen to this album. On my first or maybe even second listen, I wasn't quite getting the feel of this album. It kind of seemed like a retread of what they did on their last album. But after a couple of extra listens, I started to see what was going on underneath this. And that is to say, really excellent pop songwriting with a lot of very interesting production. The guitar tones that they use on this album are just so slick and crisp and sweet sounding all over the place. And it's not just a straight ahead simplistic pop album. There are a few like tiny avant-garde flourishes in this album that add some musical depth. It's the kind of thing that on my third and fourth and fifth listen now, I'm starting to appreciate even more. And that's really, really important to me with my pop music, that it lasts longer than just a couple of listens. All right, I want there to be more than just 3 licks to get to the center of my Tootsie Roll pop, so to speak. Next up, the Deer Hunter's new EP, All Is As All Should Be. Millions of minds express opinions like they're gospel. Now, this album, or EP, I should say, came out on December 1st, so it's another really late addition to this list, which is kind of a running theme. It represents what I believe to be a really strong step forward for the Deer Hunter. They've been doing this multi-album progressive rock thing for a long time now, And it seems like their last album will be the last one in that storyline, and that from this point on, they're going to be doing something different. They have to redefine themselves. And the songs on this album, I believe there's 6 of them, are really well-written songs. They're poppy, but they are deep enough that they hold up to repeated listenings. In fact, I enjoy these new songs quite a bit. They are some of the strongest stuff that they've put out, as I seem to say almost every time they put out new music. Next up, Intervals, The Way Forward. Now, Intervals, if you haven't heard him, is an instrumental metal guitarist who uses a lot of what I would call jazz fusion stylings in his music. I would even go so far as to call it mom metal, which is a, made-up genre that I came up with last year to describe Pliny's album, which was kind of similar in its sonic vocabulary. Really expert playing on this, fun songs that are both catchy and also really technical. So they have that thing that I'm looking for, which is to say that they hold up to multiple listenings. So I really highly recommend that you check out the new Intervals album if you're looking for some really skilled guitar playing. Next up is Komachi Washington's Harmony of Difference. Komachi Washington's last release was this massive 3 LP collection of jazz music called The Epic, which kind of sounded like a exploration of the entire history of jazz crammed into a few hours of music. And it was really, really good, but it was almost impenetrable. It was almost too much music to get through, and that made it really hard to appreciate the totality of what he accomplished with that. This EP, which I would probably call a full-length album because there's a lot of music on here as well, but it's much more scaled back. It's much more manageable, and I think that it's even more accessible than what he did on The Epic, which I think makes it a really good starting point for anyone who wants to get into Komachi Washington's discography or just start to explore the genre of jazz in general. That's not to say that this is like beginner's jazz, because it isn't. It's a really richly constructed album, really moving, but it works around a relatively small set of melodic structures. It's like he takes this musical phrase and builds on it in different ways for all the different tracks on this EP. So it's really interesting, and I highly, highly recommend that you give this a listen. Next up, we have The War on Drugs, A Deeper Understanding. I've been pulling on the wire, but it just won't break. Now, this is a vibe album for sure. I would kind of describe this album as the musical offspring of Bob Dylan and maybe Bruce Springsteen, filtered through modern production sensibilities. To me, there's not a single standout track that I always want to go back and listen to. It's an album. The unit that you need to listen to A Deeper Understanding in is its album form, because it is so much of a vibe kind of album. It's very mid-tempo throughout most of the album, really well produced, excellent songwriting, but it's got kind of this Americana feel to it. Yeah, it's just got a really great vibe. And you should listen to it. Next up, Toro y Moi's Booboo. It's been a while since he put out an album, and his last album was kind of venturing into this like 70s funk thing, and it sort of worked for me, but sort of didn't. But Booboo is moving forward in time into kind of almost an 80s style R&B, a lot of really excellent vintage sounding synth work on this thing with kind of that nostalgic R&B thing going on. It's a danceable album, great production, It's something that I listened to multiple times, and it's just a fun album. Next up, Arcade Fire's Everything Now.
Some boys hate themselves, spend their lives resenting their fathers.
I was probably pretty slow to get on the bandwagon for this one, especially after the second single that they released, I believe it was Electric Blue, which upon first listen, I did not like that song. It was like kind of shrill and annoying. I've since come around on it, and I really enjoyed that song. But again, this is one of those albums that you have to listen to maybe once or twice to really see the artistry. What Arcade Fire has done here is present something that is pop sensible, but musically dense, musically interesting. Every single track is diverse, but there's this unifying kind of thematic message about the album that is always making a comment on modern society, which of course is very much a thing that Arcade Fire does. The songs are great, the production is great, the music videos for this album are absolutely fantastic, and it is one that I've come back to over and over again this year, which is why, of course, it makes my list of the favorite albums of 2017. You've got to check this one out. Next up, Grizzly Bear's Painted Ruins. For me, Grizzly Bear is one of the few bands that really bridges the gap between indie music and progressive rock, but not the modern cheesy progressive rock that seems to be coming out today. I think as a band, they possess the foundational principles that made progressive rock of the 1970s so interesting. They were taking this sort of pop music genre, or in Grizzly Bear's case, modern indie music, and pushing it to its limits, trying to make it more grand in its scale, more dense in its production, more substantial in its songwriting process. And Grizzly Bear has always done that. From the first time I heard Vegetamized years ago, what I was hearing was a band that was unique. It was doing something very, very different. And I'm so glad that they're back after this long hiatus and coming back with such a strong album. The vibe of this album is so chill, but so dynamic. Right? It moves from these chill moments to these really big orchestral sounding swells of instrumentation. There are days where I might consider Painted Ruins to be better than Shields. That's huge. That's huge. Last, but certainly not least, what may very well be my favorite album of the year, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard's Flying Microtonal Banana. This is an album that has absolutely broadened my idea of what music could be. If you've not heard this album, what King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard did on Flying Microtonal Banana is take a number of instruments that are used in the modern Western canon, guitars, basses, keyboards, and modified them to play what are known as microtones, which, to simplify that concept, it's basically just the notes between the notes that you hear. And the first couple of listens of this album were a challenge. I've been a big fan of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard for some years now, and the inherent rock and roll, the raw intensity of this music, it kept pulling me back in for repeated listens. And the microtonal thing really grew on me. And because of that, I've started to explore music from different regions of the world. That album was the first of what they say is going to be 5 albums released in 2017. Now, I didn't want to make this the King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard list this year, even though for me, their music has very much dominated 2017. So I narrowed it down to just the one album. That being said, the other 3 albums that they released this year, Murder of the Universe, Sketches from Brunswick East, and Polygon Wonderland, are all really great albums, perhaps with the exception of Murder of the Universe. For me, they have been the winners of 2017 by a long shot. because of the fact that they've taken us listeners on this musical journey through a very wide array of musical genres, from this microtonal world music through elevator jazz with sketches from Brunswick East, and even into more synthy, kind of darker, atmospheric stuff with their most recent release, Polygondwanaland. Such good music. I highly recommend that you check out any of those albums. That's it. Those are my favorite albums of 2017. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, make sure that you subscribe. And while you're down there, feel free to leave me a comment about this list. What did you like from this year? What did you not like from 2017? What albums are you looking forward to for next year? I would love to engage with you in the comments section below. And until next time, keep listening to great music, because there's a ton of it out there. There's so much music, and so much of it is worth listening to. What a time to be alive.